Well, this is another episode of Presbyterian and Reformed Churchmen. I'm Pastor George, and I'm with a friend of a friend, John Maynard. John is a ruling elder in my original home state, Florida, and he is a friend of Gabe Williams, who I had on last week. Gabe said, you got to talk to this guy, John. And if you could see this online, he does not have horns.
Yeah, I'll get where I do have horns.
Oh, that is funny. Yeah, he's got a mount of a doll sheep from Alaska behind his head, and it's protruding from. It looks like it's protruding from his own head. So, John, why don't you introduce yourself a little bit and tell us maybe about that mount behind you, since it's right there.
That mount is almost let's say it's 90 years old. My granddad shot it in 1932, I'm pretty sure, and he's long deceased, but I've carried it around with me from home to home for a long time. He's such a beautiful head that I keep it and a few others in my office.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm glad to know you don't have horns. Where are you from originally, and where are you now? And tell us about your church.
Originally from Amarillo, Texas, which is in the northern panhandle of Texas. I joined a OPC church there after growing up in the PCUSA, and really finding Christ through Young Life and a few other ministries. Anyway, grew up there, moved to Florida. I think it was about 1990, and moved originally to Jacksonville, Florida, and then later to Orlando, Florida. In Jacksonville, we were at a PCA church called Christ Church in Mandarin, and then in Orlando, we go to St. Paul's Presbyterian. I've been a ruling elder at St. Paul's, I believe it's hard to believe, but about 20 years.
Oh, okay. So you've been there a while.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. How do you know Gabe?
You know, we primarily met at Presbytery, just got to be good friends there. And, so it was mainly through that. I was on the minister's work committee at Presbytery, and we interviewed his pastor. So we had a lot of involvement through that, a new pastor they had. So that's mainly how I got to know him. Okay,
great. And I didn't mention it for our listeners to know where we're going with this. John has done battle with cancer, so we're going to talk about God's providence in the life of a ruling elder and how that impacts ministry, family, how it impacts relationship with God, and how we view our time on earth. And I'm looking forward to that conversation. Before we jump into that, though, tell me a little bit about your family.
I have a family of four. My eldest is a son. He actually lives here in Orlando, works in a financial services company. I have a second daughter that lives in Denver. She's an attorney. A third that's an attorney in Nashville. We've never had attorneys in our family before, but we do now.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And the fourth is a home engineer here in Orlando. Each of them have kids. We have a total of 11 grandchildren who have really brightened up our life. So.
Yes. And what's your wife's name?
Elise. And we were actually high school sweethearts, and got married not too long after we both finished college. And so we've known each other. In fact, we the other day had our 50th anniversary of our first date. So.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. Oh, very, very, very cool. Yeah. So similar to that, but not exactly. But my wife is, I always say her name is Susan, and she was the girl I wanted to be my high school sweetheart. We knew each other in high school, and I definitely had a crush on her, but we didn't get together until 10 years later.
Oh, that's great.
And yeah. And this year will be the 20th year, I think, of our first date. I have to think about that. I should know these things.
Yeah, we should.
But wait, I didn't even ask before. Like, what do you do? Are you retired, and what is your profession?
I am semi-retired. Every time I go to MD Anderson, they ask me that question, and I don't know how to answer it because they don't have an in between. But because of the mantle cell or the cancer that I was diagnosed with, kind of became my full-time job over the last 12 months, and I have a lot of other responsibilities, but my career was in medical devices, primarily having to do with spine surgery. And later did some in cardiovascular surgery, a little bit in neurosurgery. But anyway, that was the main career that I've had. And I'm still tinkering around with medical devices and doing different things in that arena, but not so much full time. I serve on the board of Westminster Seminary in Philadelphia, and that, especially of late, has kept me very, very busy on some different projects. And then I'm just silly things like I'm on the HOA here in my neighborhood, and of course I'm on our church board. So all those things really end up taking quite a bit of time. But back to my main career, it was really in medical devices.
Yeah, wow! I forgot you're on the board at Westminster. Yeah. That's awesome. So you have a lot of iron, was it irons in the fire, so to speak. I do. So I'm sure cancer has kind of thrown a monkey wrench in a lot of your plans. You seem like a driven guy, a guy who has plans, and a guy who doesn't want to waste time. And I'm sure going through a year's worth of treatment has really kind of So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, my journey with cancer started in a funny way. I was attacked by a swarm of hornets, and that in itself was an object lesson of how God turns difficult things into good things. But what that did was the bites became infected. I had a lot of problems with them, and ultimately, when my lymph nodes didn't shrink back down after that, somebody somewhere along the line says, you might want to get that checked. So I had him biopsied, and about 3 months later, and showed up the next day at the doctor's office, and he said, well, you have mantle cell lymphoma. Of course, I had no clue what that was, other than knowing that it was a form of blood cancer. And anyway, when I got home, I do what everybody does in a situation like that. I consulted Dr. Google and tried to find out what was this disease that I had contracted, and it was very sobering to learn. It's the rarest lymphoma. Only 6% of lymphomas are mantle cell, and it's also, I found this out later, but it was evident in the articles that I was reading, that it's the deadliest cancer and also one of the most difficult to treat. And so those were all very sobering things. In so many ways, the obvious is it woke me up to my mortality in a way that I never would have expected. I think I thought back, and I think I used to sit at funerals and think, that'll never happen to me, which of course is absurd, but that's just the way we tend to think. We don't tend to think about our time on earth being finite and limited. And so it really helped me in that regard, just to face the inevitability of my own demise was really a very healthy thing for me. Anyway, for days I prayed the Hezekiah prayer that he'd give me. I prayed for 20 more years. Hezekiah only prayed for 15, but I was trying to adjust for inflation. But anyway, yes. As he often does, God really unmistakably and amazingly provided deliverance through some doctors at MD Anderson, who some 10 years ago had decided, even though this was the rarest of lymphomas and the most difficult to treat, he wanted to tackle it. And so ultimately, through the treatments that Dr. Wong prescribed and came up with, I've been I was declared in remission about 45 days ago. Full remission is the term they use, which means, it can always come back. In a sense, cancer never goes away. This particular cancer doesn't have a cure. But anyway, particularly also some of the early, back to Dr. Google, the treatments that were commonplace about 10 years ago were extremely, they were just daunting. And instead, what I was treated with was an immunotherapy, which particularly attaches to the cancerous cells as opposed to kind of the shotgun blast of chemotherapy. And so I've had two medications in that respect that I've taken on. The other things I've learned is when my pastor, Justin Borger, great guy, came over and talked with me the first day after my diagnosis, he said, well, John, this is going to give you a voice that you've never had before in the church. And that's been obviously very true. When I came back to him 4 weeks later and told him, you didn't tell me it would also give me ears. And because in so many ways, I think worship and everything that goes with that just was so greatly enhanced. I mean, it's just like became a megaphone in my ears. So that was really too a great blessing. Anyway, there are so many other things that it's taught me. It's just taught me to the total dependence day by day, moment by moment. If you're the fact that there is no cure puts you in a place where you never know when it will recur, and so there's that. And I think too, I mean, just the obvious, like I mentioned earlier, our time is short. Like Paul said in 1 Corinthians, I think he was talking about marriage, but it's our time is limited, and even though we don't know how short it is, it's short, and so it's really given me much more of a right now counts forever type mindset. I think that was a R.C. Sproul expression from Ligonier. But anyway, and like I've said to you before, cancer has taught me a lot. Cancer is a lot like sin. There are a lot of similarities between sin and cancer, and that's been interesting to learn and just to recognize how a disease operates in many ways, the same way indwelling sin does in our lives.
Oh, that's great. I want to dig into that a little more too. But first, just so a month and a half, you've been in remission. Mm-hmm. I'm sure that was a joyful thing. When you first got the news, how was it like? How did your family receive it when you first got the news that you had the cancer? That's a
great question. Well, really, my wife. I always say my wife is a rancher woman from Texas, and some years it rains and some years it doesn't rain, and you just stick with throughout. So she's very level-headed. That helped me be level-headed about it. It was, there was a certain measure of shock that went with it. I think, what was most interesting to me was how my kids responded. And they, I felt closer to them and more loved by them than I have in a long time. It was really a very touching experience to me because they really, just went out of their way to express, sincere love and respect and, things that, mean everything when they come from your kids.
No, that's a blessing. Yeah. And that's a sweetness. Yeah. That's God's sweetness to you through that. That's great. So when you, again, you're involved in a lot of things. You had a full-time job. You're on a board of a Westminster. You're a ruling elder in your church. You're on the HOA. So did you have to, like, what was some of the tension there in trying to care for yourself and do what you needed to do to beat this, but also meet what you would view as your responsibilities or your, you had a lot of balls in the air. So what?
Yeah, I've always had in life a lot of balls in the air. So this was just one more ball. I mean, it was in the sense that I really, I just took it on as another job, as another contract. I do a lot of contract consulting now, and so it was almost like that. I mean, I just, I take to go into treatments. I just always take my backpack full of work in there and work the whole time, and not, I in some ways it made me slow down and obviously reflect a lot more on life. But I mean, it was. I don't want to downplay it, but it was in that sense almost just another thing that I had to do.
Yeah, I think you and I would be a lot alike in that. It's I don't remember if I told you I was a project engineer and project delivery leader for Oh, okay. I was an engineer, a mechanical engineer with Procter and Gamble for.
Oh, wow.
In a former career. So yeah, I it's all we us engineers, we manage things, and
right.
But I actually could kind of get that. A lot of ruling elders come down with illnesses. You're mature men in the faith, and making your time count and serving as God has called you. And so it's not, we have a ruling elder here who's been through cancer now. He recently had a stroke, and he's not even that old. And I look forward to having him on as God would allow. But what advice would you have for ruling elders that are going through their own trials and in their life as they're trying to shepherd the church, and particularly in a reformed setting where we truly believe in the sovereignty of God and God's providence, even, I was going to say even, especially in these things. Any advice or comments or thoughts?
I think it's so many other struggles in life. I mean, this is a mammoth struggle because it's really a fight for life. But like so many of those, I think that it's a test. It's a test. Do you really believe what God says about Himself? Do you really believe, just in most fundamental terms, do you believe that He loves you and cares for you as a child? And there were some early things that happened to me in that experience that really, I almost pull back the curtain in terms of seeing the love of Christ and His care for me. It still kind of gets to me today, but it was so clear to me that He was in control, and so clear to me that He was caring for me. I mean, the fact that how would I ever know that a guy 10 years ago decided to take on, he's a Chinese doctor, to take on mantle cell lymphoma. I mean, how would I have ever imagined that? But, when it all came together, even getting into MD Anderson was, almost an act of, a miraculous act in itself. Just happened to have a friend, former friend in Texas who worked for a guy who was on the board of MD Anderson. I couldn't get in there for about 3 months. When I talked with this guy the next week, the doctor called me and set up an appointment. Doctors don't call patients that they've not had before. And so, that, and then I was diagnosed, I think it was on November 5th, and I actually entered treatment before Thanksgiving. Obviously anything you want to get on quickly, just those events, in so many ways, just really so plainly revealed to me God's care and love for us as a family. And, even on the church side, there were guys I met at church there in Houston, one of whom I had, actually initiated on the board at Westminster about 3 months before. That was a pastor in a church there were just an incredible number of ties. One of the pastor in that church had his wife had MCL, as rare as this disease is. His wife had MCL. His wife also happened to have gone to the University of Texas with my sister. There were so many things like that just, made me stop several times and go, wow, this, you really do love me.
Wow. That's awesome. I mean, as you were saying it, I'm like, yeah, not only is God completely in control, obviously He is, but He's moving heaven and earth for you, in your life. I mean, that's just, what a crazy thought.
It really is.
And it's like sometimes I don't wish that on anybody, cancer, but like those are the times where it's like, he's showing you in a more obvious outward way, but the truth is that's how He works all the time.
Exactly. That's why I say it's just like pulling
amazing.
back the curtain for a bit and seeing it more plainly than I hadn't had in a long, long time. It just was, that's part of what I mentioned earlier about just giving me ears. It was like a megaphone in my ear again and again, and So those have been incredible growing points for me, and obviously my wife has gone through this all with me. She's gone with me in every treatment and every meeting with the doctor and all those kind of things.
So how has the experience impacted your shepherding of the people in the church where you serve?
Actually not that much. I'm very fortunate in that, that most of my treatments really had no side effects. That was another thing, just kind of like, how can this be? Especially from the early stuff I read. So, I have really been able to keep up most of my responsibilities. No problem going to GA last year, continued to attend most presbytery meetings. And in terms of just shepherding in the church, it's had some impact. It took time and takes time to do some of the things that are in my treatments, but I've still been able to be involved in a lot of shepherding situations that were necessary. I've never felt like I've had to pass up on something that I wish I could have done and I didn't have time.
Yeah, and what I would really like to get at is how has the experience overall, like now how it's affected you in being able to shepherd, but how has it made you more aware of things within the congregation and how to reach people and show compassion,
one thing's obvious, it's giving me a lot more sympathy for people struggling with any sickness, but especially with cancer. I mean, just because of there is it's funny, when you go to MD Anderson, it's almost like you're in a club. It's really actually, I've actually found MD Anderson to be a very joyful place to be, even though everyone there in a sense is, struggling for life. So, so it's given me that. I mean, that kind of goes without saying. There's a new empathy and sympathy for those in difficult situations, and that doesn't necessarily require sickness. I mean, we all find ourselves in things that we can't handle on our own. So I think it's helped me a lot in that.
That's a good point. So let's switch gears to what you said before. So you talked about cancer and what it's taught you about sin. And so I'd love to use that as an opportunity to transition into maybe talking about our role as elders and how we view these things. Yeah.
Well, there are a lot of things I've learned about cancer just because of being in the medical field. I was real interested to learn a lot about it. I also have a brother-in-law who's on the board with me at Westminster that is an oncologist. So, there are things about, mantle cell lymphoma particularly attaches to your B cells. B cells are one of your different blood cells. And what it does is it attaches to a B cell and more or less overtakes a B cell and then kind of conceals itself. It acts like a B cell and hides like it's, a normal cell, but ultimately attacks other B cells, attaches to them, and takes them over. So it's kind of it's very stealthy. It's even now it's probably in hiding somewhere, even though I'm in full remission, and so it has the ability to kind of pop back up. And of course, sin is the same way. It has that tendency to to stick its head up at the worst time, and so. It's the neat thing too is the therapy that I've been through is immunotherapy. Immunotherapy actually goes and as opposed to kind of the shotgun blast of chemotherapy, immunotherapy actually finds cancerous blood cells, which have a particular chemical profile, attaches to them and kills them. So there's a picture of sanctification there, I think, too, in terms of really searching out our sin, the sin in our hearts, and dealing with it and mortifying it. And so, anyway, those are things that I've learned. I think that I was thinking about that passage in 1 Peter today, where it says the devil prowls around like a roaring lion seeking someone to devour. in so many ways, that's what cancer does, and that it's the nature of the disease that you have to fight it every day.
Yeah, wow, that's a great it's a great illustration. I can think of pastors all over listening to this, showing up in their sermons in the next few months, and really, I mean, it is a deep sort of analogy about just hiding within, and we think everything's fine, and oftentimes it rears its head or it reveals itself because of something else, like in your case, getting bit by hornets or whatever. You got attacked by. Those are vicious. But once again, like we always say, like you've probably heard a pastor say this in sermons hundreds of times, like it's not loving not to tell somebody what the cure is if they have a deathly disease, and yet we're so allergic to telling people they have cancer of the soul.
Oh, it's so true. My general practitioner who told me of the diagnosis is a good friend, and I could tell it was about the last thing he wanted to tell me. But it's bad news that's good news, though. Just because, to carry the analogy forward, there's a perfect solution to the sin that courses through our body. And although we will never defeat it, in a sense, I'll never defeat this cancer. I'll either die from it or die with it. But there will, there'll be a day when I'm delivered from it. So, yeah.
Oh, amen. That's a good word. Yeah. The other thing I'm thinking of that we use the analogy is it destroys from within. So it's in hiding and it destroys from within. And, people throw around the analogy often of like a problem existing within an organization as it's a cancer eating away from the inside, and it goes unnoticed. And, I think we got to be on the lookout for that too. I mean, I think, within Christianity, within the PCA, I mean, so many Bible verses tell us to be on the lookout for false teaching, false teachers, to be vigilant about these things, So any thoughts on that as we
No, for sure.
Here?
I mean, that I think that whenever you allow false doctrine to go without confronting it, like Paul says in Timothy, without dealing with it, then you're not helping the church. You're not doing your job, most importantly. And there's the nature of the cancer of sin is that it only goes forward. And so unless it's addressed, unless you deal with it, then it's only going to go in one direction. Same thing's true as church discipline. I mean, if you don't address problems and confront them, then it's the picture of leaven. The leaven is going to spread in the dough, and so you've got to deal with it, early and decisively. And obviously that I don't want to get into church discipline as a subject, but I think there's analogies there that work.
Yeah, no, that no doubt. And so you tell me about your role on the board of Westminster and what's that involved? How long you been there?
Oh boy, I was thinking about that the other day. I think it's been almost 18 years. I think a real close friend of mine is on faculty there, Dr. K. Scott Oliphant. He's kind of I think he's the head of the apologetics department there. He first got me interested in serving on the board there. And it's been a great time. There have been some very difficult controversies through time that we've dealt with, but I've been an officer on the board for some amount of time. I'm over the what they call their governance committee, and so there's a lot of work to be done in that in terms of just managing how we work as a board, how we relate to the seminary administration. But it's been an incredibly rewarding time. Some of the guys that I have met there, particularly the faculty, they're just incredible men, really passionate to see the true gospel taught, and so they're it's been a very rewarding, very, very rewarding experience.
Oh, that's phenomenal. So I'm doing my doctor of ministry with BTS, Birmingham Theological Seminary, and they have a new program. I'm in the first round of it in apologetics. So it's like really the only D-Min in apologetics. And so David Filson was my professor, and of course he teaches at Westminster at times. And his dissertation advisor was Scott Oliphant. And I've been so enriched by Dr. Oliphant's books, and his covenantal condescension is just a beautiful way of explaining. So if you next time you see him, tell him his labors are carrying on through his own students, who then carry it on to us. So
amazingly, I went to high school with Scott Oliphant back in Texas.
Okay,
and that was for both of us kind of BC, before Christ. And so it was, we always say we have a pact of mutually assured destruction. We won't either one of us bring up our former lives to anyone. So, but he's such a great guy. I mean, I can't tell you, he was the funniest guy I knew in high school. And now he's just the most intelligent guy I know. He's really an incredible guy, and incredible. He's just had an amazing effect on me in terms of understanding apologetics and how to speak the truths of the faith into a fallen culture.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, that's awesome. I love the work of those guys in Westminster, Philly. So thank you for. I forgot about that when I got on here with you on this. How about the PCA? So you've written your articles. You Aquila Report ran some. Obviously, we're of the same persuasion when it comes to the issues going on in the PCA, particularly around Side B and Revoice, and we know that's kind of been debated and discussed, to the fullest. But kind of what's your hope going into this GA and for the future of the PCA and
well, that's a big question.
As a ruling elder,
it is,
isn't it?
We had our Presbytery meeting just last week, and it didn't turn out as well as I'd hoped. It was, and ours either. I'm convinced that that was because we had, as compared to last year, many, many fewer ruling elders in attendance, and it's a really difficult thing. Presbyteries can be totally weird for a ruling elder that's never been there before, and but I think it's vital and I'm a huge fan of seeing ruling elders get more involved in presbytery and General Assembly. It seems like in the last few years there's been a lot more involvement at General Assembly. I'm not sure that it's been appreciated by those same ruling elders, that if they don't show up and vote at Presbytery at the same time, then a lot of the overtures that at least I would hope go through don't go through. So I think it's really critical for that. I think that, I'm really trying to figure out now in our Presbytery how to consistently increase ruling elder attendance. And I'm convinced that, first of all, it's got to start with teaching elders who really explain to their session why they're needed, and to strongly encourage them to come, not just having an agenda item that comes up, okay, who wants to go to Presbytery, but to really teach ruling elders to engage at Presbytery. They're not only, they not only should go, they're needed. So that's a lot of what I'm trying to figure out right now. I think that, I think there's some other things that Presbytery as a whole can do to encourage ruling elders to come. Obviously, meeting on days of the week that they can make it always helps. But in addition, I think, like I said, I have thought back on my first few Presbytery meetings, and it was like walking into a different world. And I think that we need to recognize that General Assembly is the same way, but it's a little more friendly. But I think Presbytery needs to do a job of helping ruling elders kind of get into Presbytery and understand what's going on, and more or less initiate them into that process.
That's like fascinating to me that you said General Assembly is a little friendlier. And so I think what it is because GA is daunting. I've only been to a couple, and it's especially the first business they're doing. You're like, what are they doing? But I will say it's easy. It sometimes is more comfortable to get lost in a crowd of 2,000 people than to be in a room of 30 to 50 people who are supposed to be your brothers and friends, and they're not including you. That's why. And so I think I can relate to that. And, I think people listening now, know I was a ruling elder, longer than I'm a teaching elder so far. I got to see when I can stop saying that. But, I would agree. Teaching elders need to really help their ruling elders navigate, and it's not just like, hey, we need 2 representatives for this meeting, and then the session votes on 2 guys or however many guys to go, and then everybody just kind of shows up, and it's like, prepare your ruling elders. Like I usually will call them if I don't meet with them, and I'll show them the agenda. I mean, they have access to the agenda. Our press just sends it to all the but like, kind of say, like, this is what this means. This is the implication of it. Here's what's going on. Here's how I'm going to speak to it or against it. Introduce them at Presbytery. You gotta kind of help them. And the same thing with GA. I mean, GA is a big place. It's daunting, but get your guys tickets to the luncheons. And take them around, introducing the people. Yeah. But
I think that, there's also, at least what I've seen at Presbytery, I think there's a certain sense in which there's not a real friendliness to new people. And I think there's a need to, this probably isn't true of every Presbytery, but I think there's a need for those kind of things you mentioned to, really make new people feel welcome. Not like they're out of the club and, why are you here this month? We've never seen you before. Instead, really, reaching out. I think that's, at least I believe in our Presbytery, that's been an issue. It's just not really been an outgoing and friendly, welcoming environment.
Yeah, that's good. And also, try to get on a committee, and that is hugely scary for guys because they feel ill-equipped. But what you don't realize is, most committees will just be happy that a ruling elder is there because they often don't have enough for a quorum. And, and so you can get on a committee and do what you should do anyway is sit and observe and learn and obviously speak up as the Lord convicts you and vote your conscience, but you don't have to be such an active player at first. So you don't have to be like, I don't know what's going on, so I can't be on a committee. Guys will be happy, and then you'll see pretty quickly the friendliness will come about because guys will just be happy that you're engaged.
Yeah, for sure. I think it just takes, and I think too, I'd say to ruling elders, get some courage, get going. I mean, step into it, and you may not understand everything that's going on, but just figure, sit by somebody that does, ask them questions, and learn it. It's really a vital part of what goes on in the PCA today.
Yeah, right. And, it's not simply the job of the teaching elders. Because when I was a ruling elder, I never went to Presbytery, which just wasn't South Florida. You just didn't have a lot of that going on. Actually, I did the last couple years, but it's this kind of thought. Well, all the pastors go and they're representing the churches, but you know what? There's a lot of voting teaching elders that aren't attached to a church, and so there's a number of guys, and I'm not. This is not me speaking down about this. It's just a reality. There's whether they're RUF pastors or guys operating out of bounds or without a call or whatever. And so there's more influence and interest there besides just local churches. And so if you want your local church to have your fair say in this, you need to send your compliment to every meeting,
Yeah.
Yeah. So Well, I think that's pretty much what we had slated to talk about. Anything you want to wrap up with, or any further topics you want to jump, any waters you want to jump in?
I'll tell you one thing that's been hot on my mind of late, and it's just that I think that there's a certain sense in which, now I'm thinking this after, like I told you, we had Presbytery last week, but I think there's a certain sense in which my thinking is we need to move beyond revoice at this point and really return to the pure gospel of Jesus Christ. And I, there are a lot of things, a lot of directions you could go with that. I do think that there's a real sense in which revoice has propagated what I at least consider a false gospel. I think there's false doctrine in it, and thinking that, and in essence, I think this has only come to me in the last 6 months, but in a real sense, it's antinomian. It really says, it says essentially the gospel I first attached to, which was, don't worry about your sins, just come to Christ. And so I had a very, when I first thought I came to Christ, I had, essentially I bought that hook, line, and sinker. That sounded like great news to me, that I could live with my sin and still, say that I walk with Christ. And, really, I ended up in a ditch with that philosophy. I mean, I ended up in deep depression, contemplating suicide. It didn't really, it doesn't work. It just doesn't work. And for obvious reasons, it's false. It's a false teaching. And so I think the idea that, you could, serve Christ and continue to identify as a homosexual, to me is almost oxymoronic. And so back to that, in terms of the gospel, I think that, one of the things I honestly think we need to do is start looking at the gay community as a foreign nation, because it is a nation. I have personally, it's been a long time, but I've personally gone into the gay community and tried to share the gospel, and it is a very tight community. It obviously has its own theology. It has its own forms of discipline. It has its own law of do's and don'ts. And I think that ultimately it's like every false gospel. It'll end up killing you. And that's what I really think we need to start thinking about. In a sense, foreign missions. A different culture that we can go into and not adapt to that culture. I mean, adapt in some ways that are not important, but obviously not give up fundamental beliefs of what Christ is offering in the gospel. And so,
yeah. So to piggyback on that, the antinomian side, which is the way I see that express itself in that is, well, I'm not going to change anyway, and Christ loves me anyway, and so I don't have to pursue that because it's not going to change, right? Like this idea of fixed orientation, and they make it like it would take a supernatural act of God to change affections, and we do know it is an act of God, but it is through ordinary means that He does that. It's not like He just decides I'm going to just do that in this one case, But the other thing I would say is, and this is, we've seen great work on this. Sinclair Ferguson has pointed it out and stuff, but antinomianism and legalism are just two sides of the same coin. And so where it gets legalistic is where it's particularly with side B, I'm okay as long as I don't do this. So it becomes about behavior modification rather than mortification of indwelling sin. And I continue to see this in the PCA where, there wants to be this distinction between what is original sin and what are actual sin. And, our confession uses that language, but people are still saying that like the thought or the idea isn't actual sin. It's indwelling sin. And it's so funny. I was just reading Louis Berkhof's Systematic Theology the other day, and he specifically says conscious thoughts and volitions are actual sin when he's describing actual sin. So the thought itself, and I don't know why this is controversial. When I have a thought that is not appropriate about anything, whether it's how I feel about my brother or whether it be about whatever fleshly thing, whatever it is, I don't say, well, I didn't act on it, or well, I shut it down before it really turned into lust. I mortify the thought that I didn't even consciously think, and I don't understand why this has become controversial. And so, but that's where I say it comes out as a legalism, because I am going to modify my behavior, but I can't modify my thought life, or my inner life. And it's a dichotomization of the physical and the spiritual. It's, and then on the antinomian side, it's a Lutheran theology view of the law, as if the law is always bad news and I can't do it. And it's not, there's no category for true sanctification, true conformity into the image of Christ. And so I do agree. I agree with you. And I've argued that for the last 2 years when guys have said, this is not a theological issue. This is, I said, it's 100% a theological issue. It's the doctrine of man. It's anthropology, which is a category of systematic theology, but it is about the gospel itself. And so I agree with you there. And I think that's a great way to focus it
I think I may have mentioned this to you, but I have like a 12-page document that I worked on over several months where I kind of worked through our confessional statements, Westminster Standards, and just highlighted those points where either side V theology, revoice theology, whichever you want to call it, where that contradicted our confessional statements. It's it's very doctrinal. There's nothing that's not theological first. But beyond that, there's some very clear contradictions with our confessional statements. And that's another thing. I really think that's where we need to be addressing it today. We need, in our examinations and things of that nature, we need to really be asking the hard questions from a confessional perspective on this issue. And in a sense, rooting out where the cancer is hiding.
Is that online?
No, I don't.
Document?
I've just shared it with some other people, but I can say I'd be happy to send it to you.
Well, I'm just trying to think of how to link to it in the show notes, but if it's not online,
no, I haven't haven't gone that far.
Okay. Yeah, I hear you. And for anybody hearing this that is like denying this stuff is going on in the PCA, I also wrote an article called "Where's Their Side B in the PCA?" You can find that on
that's an
Quiller
excellent
or on
article,
my website.
But
oh, you read it? Yeah, well, great. And in there it shows like a certain famous pastor who has left, but right before he left, he basically said he wouldn't, if a gay married couple came to his church, he wouldn't seek to break the marriage up. He's fine with the spiritual aspect side of things. Once again, it's all about, he called it desexualizing the relationship. So once again, it's about like physical, we're going to modify the behavior, but not modify, what this is imaging to the world, what this is saying about our insight. So this very much is still going on. And that's what we've argued all along.
Yeah. James 1 makes patently clear that, sin begins with our evil desires, my evil desire. I have to own my desires, and that's the birthplace of sin. And we see that in the 10th commandment. I mean, there is a desire there that is called sinful. It's coveting, not just going and stealing somebody's home, but coveting their home. That's wrong.
Right. Whether that was conscious on your part or not, it's yours. It's yours. So, yeah. Well, John, I've really enjoyed this conversation, and you've blessed me.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Yeah. And I guess with that, that's another episode of Presbyterian Reformed Churchmen. If this podcast is a blessing to you, follow it on iTunes or Spotify or YouTube or Google Podcasts, wherever you listen, but share it with other ruling elders, because my heart behind this is not to show like we have some super ruling elders in the denomination, but I really want to just show normal guys walking in the calling that God has given them, struggling with things like cancer, in previous episodes, running a business, but seeking to, once again, live up to this calling that the Lord has placed upon, each man. And so share this with other ruling elders, and I hope it encourages you to be involved in ways.
Thanks so much, George.
Thanks.
Yeah.
You're welcome.